There's something sitting in your refrigerator right now that looks completely safe. You cooked it yesterday, you stored it properly, you plan to heat it again and eat it without a second thought. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if the way you reheat that food is slowly exposing your body to harmful compounds without any taste, smell, or warning sign? Most people worry about what they eat. Very few think about what happens to food after it's been cooked and then heated again. And yet, in clinical practice, we often see patterns that don't make sense at first. People who eat home-cooked meals avoid junk food and still show signs of ongoing inflammation or metabolic stress. So what are we missing? This isn't about creating fear. It's about understanding how certain everyday habits can change the chemistry of food in ways your body doesn't handle as easily, especially as you get older. Let me explain. When food is cooked, it already goes through chemical changes. That's normal. Heat breaks down proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. It makes food easier to digest. But when the same food is cooled, stored, and then reheated, a second layer of changes can occur. And this is where things start to get interesting. Some nutrients degrade, some compounds oxidize. In certain cases, new byproducts can form, especially when heat, time, and storage conditions combine in specific ways. Now here's the key question. Does that automatically mean these foods cause cancer or serious illness? No, that would be an oversimplification. But what research does suggest is this. Repeated exposure to certain degraded compounds combined with age-related changes in metabolism may contribute to increased oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. And over time, those processes are linked to higher risk of multiple health conditions. So instead of thinking in extremes, safe or dangerous, it's more accurate to think in terms of cumulative impact. Small exposures, repeated over years. But why does age matter so much in this conversation? Because the body changes. After the age of 50 or 60, the systems responsible for detoxification and repair don't work at the same speed as they once did. The liver processes certain compounds more slowly. Antioxidant defenses may be reduced. Cellular repair mechanisms are still active, but less efficient. So the margin for error becomes smaller. That doesn't mean the body becomes weak. It means it becomes more sensitive to repeated stress. And one of the biggest drivers of that stress is something called chronic inflammation. You've probably heard that word before. But here's what it actually means in simple terms. Inflammation is your body's defense response. It's useful in short bursts, fighting infection, healing injury, but when low-level inflammation continues for long periods, it can begin to affect tissues, blood vessels, and cellular processes. Now think about this. If certain reheating habits increase exposure to oxidized fats, degraded proteins, or bacterial byproducts, and this happens regularly, could that contribute to ongoing low-level inflammation? This is where the concern begins, not from one meal, not from one mistake, but from a pattern. And this is exactly what many people overlook, because the habits feel normal. Reheating leftovers, using the microwave, saving food for the next day. These are practical everyday behaviors. So the real question becomes, are all reheated foods equal, or are some more likely to create problems under certain conditions? That's what we're going to explore. But before we get into the specific foods, there's one more thing you need to understand. Not every risk comes from the food itself. Sometimes the issue comes from how the food is stored, how long it sits, how evenly it's reheated, or how many times it goes through that cycle. For example, when food cools slowly and stays at room temperature too long, bacteria can begin to grow. Reheating may kill the bacteria, but not always the substances they've already produced. So now we're dealing with two layers of concern. Chemical changes from heat and biological changes from storage. But here's where it becomes even more important. These changes don't always cause immediate symptoms. You may not feel anything unusual, no discomfort, no warning, which raises another question. If there are no symptoms, how would someone even know this is affecting them? The answer is they often don't, until patterns show up later. So instead of reacting after the fact, the goal is to understand which habits are worth adjusting now, not to eliminate foods completely, not to create anxiety around eating, but to reduce unnecessary exposure where it actually matters. And this is where things get very specific. Because while many foods can be reheated safely when handled properly, there are a few that require extra attention due to how their structure changes after cooking. So what are these foods? And more importantly, what exactly changes inside them when you reheat them? So let's take a closer look at the foods that deserve more attention when it comes to reheating, and more importantly, why they behave differently. We'll go step by step, starting with the least concerning and moving toward the ones where habits matter most. First, potatoes. Potatoes are often seen as simple and harmless, and when freshly cooked, they can be part of a balanced meal. But once cooked and cooled, something interesting happens inside them. Their starch structure changes, forming what's called resistant starch. This type of starch is actually beneficial. It digests more slowly and can support gut health. But here's where the shift happens. When you reheat potatoes at high temperatures, especially multiple times, that resistant starch can convert back into a more rapidly digestible form. This may lead to quicker spikes in blood sugar, particularly in people who already have some degree of insulin resistance, but that's only part of the story. If potatoes are fried or cooked at high heat and then reheated again, certain heat-related compounds may increase. These are being studied for their potential long-term effects when exposure is frequent. So what's the practical takeaway? If you're eating leftover potatoes, keeping them refrigerated promptly and reheating gently, or even consuming them cold in dishes like salads, may help preserve their more stable form. But occasional reheating is not something to panic about. The key is frequency and method. Now here's the next question. What about protein foods like chicken? Chicken is widely used for meal prep. It's convenient and nutritious. But reheating methods matter more than most people realize. Microwaves, for example, heat unevenly. That means some parts of the food become very hot while others may remain at lower temperatures. If bacteria were present due to storage conditions, uneven heating may not fully eliminate them. But here's the important distinction. This is not about chicken becoming toxic. It's about food safety and proper reheating. Cutting chicken into smaller pieces before reheating, ensuring it reaches a safe internal temperature, and avoiding repeated reheating cycles can reduce these concerns significantly. So the issue is not the food itself, it's how consistently safe practices are followed. Now let's move to something many people consider extremely healthy. Leafy greens. Spinach, kale, and similar vegetables are rich in nutrients. But after cooking, storing, and reheating, certain naturally occurring compounds, like nitrates, can undergo changes depending on conditions such as temperature and storage time. But here's where we need to be careful. This does not mean reheated greens are automatically harmful or should be avoided completely. The concern mainly arises when food is left at room temperature for extended periods before refrigeration, allowing changes to occur more rapidly. So what matters most? Proper storage. Cooling cooked greens quickly, refrigerating them promptly, and avoiding long periods at room temperature reduces these risks significantly. Now, this leads to another important question. What about staple foods like rice? Rice is one of the most commonly consumed foods worldwide, but it's also one of the most sensitive when it comes to storage. Here's why. Rice can contain bacterial spores that survive the initial cooking process. When cooked rice is left at room temperature for too long, those spores can become active and produce substances that are not destroyed by reheating. So even if the rice is steaming hot when reheated, certain byproducts may still remain. Does this happen every time? No. But the risk increases when rice is left out for long periods, stored improperly, reheated multiple times. So the safest approach is simple. Cool rice quickly after cooking, refrigerate it within a reasonable time, reheat it once, and avoid repeating the cycle. Now here's where things become even more relevant. Fried foods and oils. When oils are heated at high temperatures, they can undergo oxidation. That's a chemical process where fats react with oxygen, leading to the formation of unstable compounds. Reheating those same oils again can increase that process. Now, in everyday terms, this means that repeatedly heating certain oils, especially in fried foods, may increase exposure to compounds associated with oxidative stress. Again, this is about repeated exposure over time, not a single meal. So what's the smarter approach? Avoid reheating fried foods with additional oil. If you do reheat them, using methods like an oven at moderate temperature may reduce further breakdown compared to frying again. But here's what most people miss. None of these foods are dangerous on their own. The real issue is the pattern. Repeated reheating, improper storage, high temperatures, multiple cycles. That combination is what increases unnecessary stress on the body. So now the question becomes, what does a safer routine actually look like? It's simpler than most people expect. Cook portions you can reasonably finish. Store leftovers quickly. Keep them refrigerated. Reheat only once. Use moderate heat. Avoid leaving food out for extended periods. Small adjustments, but consistent ones. And this is where expectations need to stay realistic. These steps do not eliminate all health risks. They do not replace medical care. And they certainly do not mean that reheated food will cause disease. But they do help reduce avoidable exposure to factors that may contribute to long-term stress in the body. So instead of asking, what foods should I fear? A better question might be, how can I handle everyday foods in a way that supports long-term health? Because that's where meaningful change happens. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. It's not just what you eat, it's how you handle it, store it, and prepare it again. Pay attention to the details. Stay consistent. And if you have specific health concerns or conditions, always discuss dietary habits with your healthcare provider. That's how you move from routine habits to informed choices. And over time, those choices matter more than any single meal.